I'm Regina. I teach and am the assistant dean for the School of Public Affairs, and my partner in crime is
Ryon. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Public Affairs, and I teach some of the courses in our grant management, writing, and evaluation certificate. So if you feel like you really love what we have to say today, you might think about coming to a couple classes. But I want to echo what Regina said earlier. If you have needs in the community, we have students who want to pair up with you. They provide grant writing services. Currently we have 14, 15 students out in the community partnering with local nonprofits to help them write grants at Grant Seek. We do the same thing with our program evaluation course and also grant management. So if you have needs, we would love to partner up and help you with those, because our students, many of them go back out into this community, and many are really dedicated to nonprofit work. We would like to make sure that they have opportunities.
I will say we've had some students working with us, and they've been fabulous.
We love to hear that. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about program eval, and you've been hearing this all day long, that it's not really about the technique per se, but it really is about how you're able to tell your story. And so what we decided to do between the two of us was to sort of think about this sort of workshop as a way to think about how to talk to a program consultant or evaluate to a consultant, an external person, or for someone who's working with a granting agency to really get the most you can get out of this evaluation exercise. And what we're finding over, both in terms of the literature and the research from both ourselves and other folks, as well as from anecdotally working with some of you guys, is that it seems like a scary prospect. And it seems to be a prospect that we don't really want to do because we're not getting anything out of this exercise. But there are ways to get something really cool out of this exercise that is unique and beautiful to your organization, and not just a number to satisfy somebody else. And so the first thing that I would want all of us to sort of think about is, what exactly is your picture of your service? Now, in our program evaluation language, we would talk about literature program theory. But essentially, what we really want to know is, how do you think about the work that you complete? And can you tell someone else about what that map looks like? When I work with folks, a lot of times that's the part that is the hardest. It's because the organization hasn't really thought about or communicated amongst itself exactly what that map of service looks like. And that map can be very superficial at the beginning, but as we start to work and drill down, it becomes much more complex, because then you're asking for the input of all the staff members, all the folks that are putting in some of the services, so that we understand how things connect. And so that it's not just an exercise of, well, we think this is what we do, but is there anything else? We're missing some pieces. And that's what happens. We end up having program evaluations at the end that are missing the pieces because we haven't put the whole picture together. And so as much of that work up front becomes what we want to sort of think about. The other thing we want to sort of think about is, as you're putting together this picture, is that we want the picture to be relevant to us. Okay? We want those sort of values to come through. And so these are abstract goals of attainment, as you would, but they have some meanings to ring through if we just have that one conversation. And so part of what we do in our program evaluation interventions with our students, etc., is that we sit down with our partners who we're working with, and we ask them, so what exactly is the picture of your service? And if you had to talk about that picture of service, where do you see it connecting up to being relevant to someone else? And how do you tell that story normally? What do you normally do? Not just what we're talking about in the programmers, but how do you tell someone that you're relevant, and write that down and capture that information? And then once we have that sort of picture, then we can go back and we can say, okay, this is what we think we're capturing. This is the stuff that we think that we know about ourselves. Now let's take it to the next level to think about, well, do we really know this? And can we put some concrete language or some processes around it? Because I think instinctively most of us are evaluating, and I know most of us are evaluating to do better all of the time. We go into the ask ourselves, can we make a difference today, and can we make it better than yesterday? We do this all the time. But the problem is trying to take some time away from that mission for 2 seconds and think about how we can routinize that process of self-reflection in a meaningful way. And so hopefully by the end of today, we'll have some tips that you will be able to sort of take home with you that allow you to do that a little bit.
So front loading for success. True story, I was up till 4 a.m. creating a final report for a partner of mine because they didn't front load for success. They backloaded and they said, here, we need this by Friday. And so I wanted to help them out, so I did it. But front loading for success is we're in, and this is really Regina's phrase that I love, it's creating a culture of evaluation that really permeates your organization. So you're not scrambling to try and meet deadlines, you're not having to crunch, have someone work an 18-hour day to get a piece of information that you need to report out to someone. If you build this into your organization, build evaluation, and there's some really simple tools, they're free. We're going to share some of those. We're going to upload them to the CME website so that you can access those. But just simple steps that you can do to help you manage any kind of data requests that you might get, any kind of reporting that you might get. And as we go through today, we are going to talk about how evaluation is important for you. I've never really thought of evaluation as something you have to do for someone else. They're tools that you all can use to make your programs better. And there are a couple of different ways that you can do that. So it's really about you and your organization and maximizing what you have and being the very best that you can be through evaluation and through data. So if you can build these things into what you're doing currently, and it's not a post hoc kind of situation, it's going to run so much more smoothly, and you will have really critical pieces of information that you need to do your day-to-day operations in your organization. So powerful tools at your disposal. We'll talk a little bit more about free resources as we get towards the end, because there are plenty of free evaluation resources, not just forms you can download online, but also you can right next to the university. We do a ton of evaluation work in our department. The university, there are plenty of professors who need to publish, so they're happy to help with research needs. Lots of options for you.
So one of the funny things that I want to start with is the end. So what exactly is the product at the end of the evaluation that you want to have? What does that report look like? What do you want to do with the reporting? Where does it go? Who do you want to communicate with? All that sort of stuff. So actually, the first thing that we meet with clients after we have talked about their map of what's happening is we literally take out our sketch pens, our crayons, and markers. And I do make my students have crayons and markers. And we sketch out what exactly will this look like. And the reason why I do this is because we think so abstractly about data. And this simple exercise actually makes it much more concrete. What do I want to be able to show? Do I want a chart at the end that has all the big squiggly lines? Or do I want to have that human story? Do I want to be able to produce something that has a head on it? And inside of that head, we have embedded the text of what we actually do. What do we want to create? Because this is part of the communication process. This is also a trick that you can use with some of your grantors who might be looking at it and saying, you know what, I read an article last week, and they say the new range is social return on investment. And so what I want you to do is I have a question that tells me how much impact do you give to your community? And then that's on the grant application, and we know that we're going to have to do it, but they didn't have a picture in their head about what that looked like. But we know that we probably should do it because it's the new, brand new baby on the block. I run into this story a lot. So part of what you can do as the experts about your data and what you have available is to have a process of asking, is this really what you want? Is this a picture? Will this help you tell your story? Because again, the grant has a story that they want to tell to you. And so we're trying to reconcile these two narratives together so that we both have a picture that we can take back to, or that we can take back to our community and say, I helped, right? So whatever that looks like, we want to be able to do that. And so we have the ability to do a lot more negotiations. One of the things that we know in the literature that nonprofit organizations who do have that moment with their grantors who ask about the data, who ask about the evaluations, have a pretty good success rate of getting the evaluation that looked horrible to be adjusted so that the data that we're doing for the evaluation work actually has something to do with the programs and not just something that they came up with on the outside that is external and doesn't have anything to do with us. So use that power to be able to do that. The other thing is that we want to sort of understand that your data is going to matter and that the data process that you use to gather, collect, etc., doesn't have to be extensive. It can be quite simple. But you want it to be consistent. And that means that we are taking control of that process rather than allowing a single grantor or a single organization to drive that process as much as possible. So those are the basic questions most of us want to know. Right? What are we doing? How are we doing it? What's it doing it? Why? Who's benefiting it? Why do they have it? Or why are they? Those are the basic questions. The rest of it just becomes more complexity or icing on the cake. And if you have an evaluation that can actually address those questions, you're doing good. If you have an evaluation that can't address those questions, then there's a disconnect between either the data that you're gathering or there's a disconnect with the way that you are interpreting that data. And so what we're going to be trying to figure out as you're thinking about it, maybe there's something that's missing. If you're a young nonprofit, and that's the ones that I specialize in, the ones that are just starting, the ones that don't have 2 years worth of data to show off to any investor, any person, these are the questions that you can start to build into your programming now. In a small way. It could be just an intake form. It could be that we're just trying to check box to see how many folks come through our doors every day for this. But we start with sort of routinizing that process and then writing it down and making sure everybody knows that this process exists. A couple days ago, I was working with an organization and I was talking to them about the program evaluation. And the funny part of the story is that we went over to some of the staff members who were there and they said, "We do evaluation, really?" They hadn't heard about it. They didn't know that they were part of it. They didn't know they were contributing data to it. They just knew that every once in a while somebody from the central office sends out an email that says, "I need all your stats." That type of process, to avoid it, means that that more than likely, no one really knows those answers to those questions. We're just trying to grab the data, because if we knew the answer to those questions, by golly geez, we would be trying to tattoo it into all of our arms, because those are the same answers that we want to be able to give to our donors, to our constituents, to our community members, that lets people know, hey, we do great things, right? And so it's a sign that perhaps there's something that's disconnected there. To avoid that situation, and just to cap off what we did with that, we talked about trying to talk to folks about evaluation. So in that organization, because they have a couple different offices all over the place, what we're doing is we're having a listening tour, as well as a tour that allows people to say, here's the type of data you should be collecting, and here's the type of data that we think we keep in our desk drawers that you don't know about, but would actually address the questions. And so even from that very that very miniature moment, they're going to get a better evaluation, because now people know they're evaluating and they have an idea of how they're contributing to it. And so we'll talk about the end of the story in about 7 months. But I think it'll be a good one, because they had that moment to see that the process needed to change.
So really with Fidelity Monitoring, this is where I feel the value really is to the organization. What you do with Fidelity Monitoring can be reported out to vendors, grantors, the community, but in general, what you're collecting through Fidelity Monitoring, that is something that you would be using in-house to tweak programs, to change them, to serve more clients. That's really kind of an internal If you're in methods or you're kind of a program eval person, this is akin to process evaluation. So it's information that you're gathering that you then use within your own organization. So what do we mean by fidelity monitoring? Each of you have invested your lives, your time, your money into your organization. And to be able to make sure that your vision, the vision of the organization, is being implemented correctly, you need to be able to share that information, and you have to work at it. And it isn't something where you want to do it, oh, we're going to do that 2 days out of the year. This should be something that's sort of built into everything that you're doing. So fidelity monitoring, again, it is simply to ensure that your vision is implemented the way that you want it to be. It helps you identify any sorts of problems that you may have. If something is not working, or if it's going off the rails a little bit, then you have that immediate feedback loop so that you can identify those issues and try and work towards correcting them. Or maybe you just need to revise things a little bit. Maybe you can't get to where you wanted to go, but this will help you address some of that. So the first part of fidelity monitoring is pretty simple. What are your goals? What is the mission? What are the goals? What are the objectives? And again, to share that information, I agree wholeheartedly with Regina. It's not something that happens at an executive level or an executive director. This is something that everybody in the organization does. And you think about it all the time. Am I doing a good job? Did I get this done? How many people were here this week? How many services did we provide in the community? So they're thinking about it all along, and it will be, they understand their role in evaluation and making sure that the program is as successful as possible. That is really helpful. Yes, ma'am. Well, okay. So one of the things that I've seen in my own work as an evaluator is that when I talk to the people at the top, they can articulate the vision perfectly. They can give me the elevator speech, the 5-minute spiel, whatever it may be. Then when I talk to line staff, they really don't have any idea. They know what their part is, but they can't necessarily articulate what the bigger vision is or how they fit within the organization. So you see this kind of disconnect between different levels within an organization. And that's problematic because when you don't really understand what you're working towards, you can't be super efficient about it. You don't see the connections between what you're doing and what others are doing. So it's important to have regular conversations about, this is what we are, this is who we are, this is what we do, this is what we're trying to accomplish. I want to make sure everyone here at the table understands what that is and what your role is, because we're all part of this together. So you want to train staff, administrators. I know that may sound silly, but what are the goals? And this is, honestly, it's relative. I know some organizations that we work with in SPOT, they're 2 people. They're like, of course they know it. There's one other person. We all know what the goal is, right? But when you have an organization that's 30, 40, 50, 100, 500, that kind of information really doesn't necessarily translate very well to everyone in the organization. Once everyone understands and is on the same page in terms of who we are, what we do, what we're trying to get to in this world, you want to kind of develop some simple instruments. Okay, this is, our first goal is to make sure that we provide services in the community for 15 at-risk youth. Okay, so write that down, put it on a piece of paper, and every day people can jot down simple notes as to, oh, this is what I did towards that goal today. It can be something as simple as that. Now, certainly there are whole programs that you can buy that cost a fortune that you can put on your computers at work, but it doesn't really need to be that complicated. It's a simple question every day. This is the vision. Am I working towards the vision? Yes, ma'am.
So a term like fidelity monitoring, which I can figure out what fidelity monitoring means, but to me it makes no sense to try and work with folks and use the terminology that they're not going to understand. So how would you say it in real life nonprofit language what this is?
Are you doing what you meant to do? You had, everyone comes to the table, they have an idea of what it is they're trying to accomplish. Are you doing it? It's as simple as that. Is that a little more?
It's sort of like I said, I think this morning at the breakfast deal. Sometimes we use terminology that probably doesn't help us as evaluators.
Absolutely. This is like a $20 word, but at the end of the day, it simply means that you created a path. Are you actually walking down the path? You're trying to get to the finish line. So you can develop really simple instruments. You can do this in staff meetings. You can do it, every day. You don't necessarily have to set aside time, but if people are kind of thinking along these lines, and when I said maybe they jot down some things every day, they could, but it could be something you just visit weekly, bi-weekly, something along those lines. Then you want to collect information on this says training, but just, any kind of intervention, any service, any program that you may be engaging in. You want to collect that information, and that can be as simple as gathering forms from people, or maybe a digital file and storing it somewhere. It can be entering information into a spreadsheet, as high up as hiring an evaluator to do this kind of work for you. But it is important to make sure that you're on top of that collection process. So often what happens is you do the first 3 steps, and then the collection process sort of lags, and there's a date that you need to be able to say certain things about your organization, either to your board or to the community, and then it's a rush. And it's stressful for everyone, so if you just kind of keep on it, spend a couple minutes a day on it, and then it won't be an issue towards the end. This information, then you would want to revisit it. It's not, you don't collect it just to report it out. You collect that information so that you have it available. You and your staff, your volunteers, you can visit that information and see where do we need to drop back, and think about things a little bit more, maybe make some changes, maybe adjust some things. So again, this is really in-house. This is to serve your organization, not others. It can be used to promote your good deeds and your good works, kind of those feel-good stories. But in general, this is something that you would use internally to make sure that you're on track, that we're meeting our objectives, that this is what we hope to accomplish, and this is where we are in that process. So that's fidelity monitoring, or just in a simple way, ensuring on a daily basis that you are headed down the right path, and that you have some markers in place to know that you're heading down the right path. So what does it look like? We sort of went through this, so I'm just going to kind of go quickly. Again, everyone understands that they are part of the evaluation team. So one of the things that I do when I work with organizations, I get everyone at the table and I go, congratulations, you're all researchers. And they frown. No, they usually get pretty excited about it. But everyone is a researcher, especially when you're in really small organizations that are 2 or 3 or 5 people. This is everyone's responsibility. Sometimes you have the luxury of dedicating a staff to at least part-time to evaluation work, but in general, everyone needs to be doing this. So sit down at the table, make sure everyone's on the same page. Create those really simple instruments. There are some guides, we'll be posting those, that talk about process evaluation and fidelity monitoring, and they have some simple checklists that you can use. Are you collecting information on the number of people who come through your door? Do you know who they are? What are their needs? Simple things like that. So it doesn't have to be burdensome to do that. And also make sure that whatever you're doing, whether you have a program or an intervention, or you're out into the community, or you're fundraising, you're there and you're present and you're observing, so that you know firsthand what is happening in your own organization. I know that one sounds kind of simple, but when you get to, again, more and more people as part of your organization or your nonprofit, that can be something that it is a challenge to be there, be present all the time. So if you can't do it in a leadership position, make sure that somebody is there. It could just be a peer, someone who's there to just make sure things are being done correctly and help that person identify growth areas, strengths, things of that nature. So when you're kind of in the moment, you don't necessarily see what's going on around you. So you just have a colleague and, we need to come back and do this. So that can be super helpful. And make sure that you're providing feedback. So that you're looking at things, you're using it as a tool. Again, it's just a tool that you can use to make sure that your program is operating, that it's efficient, that you're working towards the goal that you set out to achieve. And then you provide that feedback to staff. So they're part of the research team. So you would want to make sure that, hey, this is what we found. We've been collecting these measures, and let's brainstorm. We're doing great. How do we do better? We need some things, we need to fix some things, how do we do that? So just make sure you keep everyone part of the team, and then no one frowns when you say yourself.
TA's technical assistance.
Sorry, I should have taken a look at that. So the other $20 word that we're going to talk about is quality assurance. And all quality assurance is really is that you're making sure that your program or your intervention or your training or your service in the community, that it's effective. So it's different from Fidelity Monitoring, but the most accessible way that I can think to describe it is you're really looking at the outcome. Did we achieve the outcome? Are we effective? Are we efficient? Are we doing this? We're maximizing our dollars, we're maximizing our resources, we're maximizing our staff time, so on and so forth. So generally, I like to talk to partners about 3 different areas that they would want to be looking at in terms of the quality assurance and making sure that you have a real quality product that you're offering to others. I don't necessarily as an evaluator get involved in all of these, but I think it's important for the organization to be thinking about, well, these are the things I probably need to keep a pulse on. So one is fiscal. This is the one I'm usually not part of. But as an organization, especially in the nonprofit sector, you need to maximize funding. Everyone needs to maximize funding nowadays. We're all on a budget. There are just resource constraints. So quality assurance and the techniques and tools you'll use there can help you kind of keep track of that. And I don't mean like in a spreadsheet with dollars and cents, but more so, are the funds being used where you're stretching your dollar as far as you can, and really revisiting that every day. Use cross-program marketing or partnerships to increase efficiency. That's kind of an easy one, and it's something that happens a lot in the nonprofit sector. So just kind of using things that are at your disposal to make sure that your money is right. Training. This could be, with staff where you're talking about research, anything that they may need to do their jobs more efficiently and more effective, and an evaluation of your program. This could be learning, it could be quality of life, it could be a lot of things. But making sure that you have a pulse on that and a way to measure it. And then your staff. Evaluation is not just to provide something external, it's you can use it internally to make sure that staff are okay. One of the things that we see really in any sector is turnover. Turnover is a program killer. It is the number one thing I tell people when I come in to do an evaluation. They go, what do we need to work on? Staff. You need to keep your staff. If you can't keep your staff, it's going to be really difficult. The most successful programs I have seen have had staff in place for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. They don't have constant turnover. So in terms of evaluation, you might not always land on staff, but it is important to include them in that loop, make sure that you're getting feedback from them, that you're taking care of them. And make sure that you have an informed and supportive administration. That's kind of creating that family atmosphere where everyone's on the same team. It tends to really matter for staff. So what does it look like? Administrative oversight for curriculum development, budgeting, networking, programs, intervention. So this is kind of a top-down approach. Typically, quality assurance is something that's going to be happening at a leadership level. It's going to originate there, but it is something that all staff can be a part of. It's not limited to leadership positions. Self-assessments. This is a big one. I promote this a lot with all of my partners because it's free. You can do your own self-assessments. There are tons of guides on how to do them. There are checklists that you can use to make sure that, okay, we're actually doing each of the steps that's necessary to ensure that we're on the right path. We're going to cross the finish line, and that what we're doing is real quality. Real quality in meaning and substance in what we're doing. So you can do that on your own. You can partner with people, either in SPA. You could maybe assign it to a staff member or a volunteer. But in general, if you want to try and do some of this work where you're again creating that culture of evaluation in your nonprofit, then the self-assessments are a great way to do it. Collective assessments of results and disseminating results to staff. So again, this requires that you do collect some information, that someone is responsible for compiling it, keeping it safe, making sure that it's not going to be burdensome or overwhelming at any point in time. Sort of a constant thing that, in that day-to-day culture of evaluation. And then once the information is collected, then there's something done with it. This is another pitfall that I see with partnering agencies. They do all this work, and they set up a system, they front load, they've got their instruments in place, they've sat down with staff, they talked it all through, they got their crayons out, they got their plan all designed, they get it all, and it just sits there. It sits on a server somewhere, it's in a file, they don't do a ton with it. And my response is, you're sitting on a treasure trove. That information can really help your organization. So don't let it sit. Make sure that on some regular basis, you're looking at what you have, that you're talking with staff about those results. That's another pitfall that I see, that the information doesn't necessarily always translate to everyone. But again, if you build that team approach, or a research team, that tends to resolve itself pretty quickly. And undertake some type, it says annual here. However often is reasonable for you, but you need to set a time. In March of every year, or biannually, whatever it may be, we're going to look at this, and we're going to have a real critical but positive self-assessment. What does the data tell us? What does this information tell us? And what are we going to do with it? You may find, hey, we're really rock stars. We don't need to do anything. That's awesome. But typically, people can always find a little room for growth. And this information that you would gather through this process will be able to give you that. Really help you pinpoint and focus where you want to grow. Use information to, again, improve the organization, enhance it.
So Stephanie gave us a lot of the pieces of this as she was talking about working with staff, making sure that people know what's going on. And I will share a couple of things with you. From the research and literature, a lot of our funders assume that we don't actually do program evaluation, that we actually don't do evaluation. They assume you do not do evaluation, which is why they are desperately trying to figure out ways to create evaluations to impose on you so that they can improve your capacity. But you do program evaluation. So remember when I talked about that first thing about that front loading, that negotiation process. If you can show them, no, we have a plan of evaluation, it's really cool. And here's what we normally do. They can negotiate and say, well, you guys are doing better than what we thought we were going to ask for, so we'll go with your plan, right? And part of getting that plan to be accepted is the culture of assessment or evaluation, or whatever you want to call it, the culture of looking at things constantly. But what they're looking for is this. Not only that you guys are going to have at the annual board meeting, the executive director coming in and laying out, here's what we know that we do. That's great, that's a good big meeting. But that's not enough. What they're also looking for are checkpoints to make sure that that data is faithful. That data is being sunk into different elements, different departments, different units. They want to see, as we're doing that mapping process, that it's not just Gina's job to do all of the assessment processes for your organization. Because if it's just Gina's job, I'm liftable. Anytime I'm no longer championing, that excitement for the data, that excitement for the evaluation goes with me. But it has to be part of everyone. And so what they're looking for is, how does this get into all of these different job portions, all these different departments, all these different programs? How do they know that they're contributing? So they're trying to look for that web. And so you can provide a picture of that web. That helps them to understand that, yes, this is part of our culture. The other thing is that we can't do anything with data, me meaning an outside evaluator. I can't do anything with missing data at the end of the year when you need the report in 2 weeks. But neither can you. And so as we're looking at this is not an end of the year thing, this is a throughout the year thing. And so what are your checkpoints to go back through from either staff level or from the board level or from the leadership team level that you guys are talking about evaluation? It's not a once a year thing, it has to be intentional throughout the entire year. My colleagues at the School of Public Affairs love me and hate me because part of what we're doing is that we too have to do this evaluation process constantly. But we don't wait till once a year to talk about it. We talk about it actually 4 times a year. We schedule into our meetings. We ask about the questions that were up on the board earlier, the very simplistic ones. And each time we meet, we're trying to figure out, well, what part of this piece is being addressed? How do we know this? And it just becomes part of our conversation so that at the end of the day, I can report back to a funding agency that our faculty know our numbers. And our faculty are actively trying to figure out, hey, there's a problem in program evaluation stuff. So let's go ahead and fix the curriculum now, rather than having to wait till that full year or year and a half modality or quarterly modality, that we can be proactive about it. And if you can show a funder that you're being proactive through that assessment process, they are much more likely to say, yeah, you guys are better, we'll take yours, we won't use ours, we'll take yours. And then you can be able to satisfy more than one funder's needs at a time without having to make backbreaking work. I've been there. I was a program evaluator from a large organization in Nebraska, and it was backbreaking trying to create 15 different types of program evaluations for 15 different funders. When I figured out that you can negotiate with these people and put it together, oh, my life got easier. So I'm hoping that you, if anything, take that one thing away. If you can show that culture of evaluation ahead of time, the funders, a lot of them will say, yeah, we like that a little bit better, or we'll change our questions to match. It's a possibility.
And just to piggyback up on that a little bit, we do, in terms of funders and what they're looking for, we live in an age of evaluation and assessment, performance measurement. Sometimes it seems, I can read a solicitation, goodness, I mean, this is half research. I mean, when do I have time to do any of the good stuff, right? So anything that you could do, and again, just piggyback on Regina, to create that for yourself so that you have it ready to show people is all good things. When I teach grant writing, one of the sections they have to do for the proposal is evaluation. Because more and more often when you look at funding opportunities, it has that evaluation piece in there. So they are expecting it to happen. So what do we mean by assessment, and what does it look like? It really can include a number of activities that you're doing where you're gathering information to be able to answer either questions that are important to your organization, your nonprofit, to making sure that it is operating at full potential, to gathering the information that you will need to report out to someone because it's something they want to see. And I agree. I wouldn't get caught up in the latest, greatest thing. People will throw out all kinds of, you'll see those big words, well, okay, I guess we're not doing that. And all likelihood you are doing that. And most often, knowing it from the funder side, they don't have any idea what they're asking you for. They just go, we would like 5 final reports and, regression modeling. They probably don't necessarily, you just want, what do you need to know? Like, let's figure this out, because I'm not sure, I'm trying to negotiate some of that. But assessment, when we talk about assessment, it's kind of, it's a big basket. It includes lots of different things. It could be observations, you could be looking through files, you could be gathering hard data, you could be gathering qualitative data. One of the things I propose to most of my partners, because they tend to focus on those numbers, well, we need to get to a 50% increase. Wonderful. You know what's really powerful? True stories. Personal stories, human stories, testimonials. Can we sort of testimonial? Testimonials are powerful. I never put a number in a report unless I have something that I can show. This is what it means for people. People or the community or an organization, I need to make it real for them. Because seeing 50%, it's nice, you were supposed to get there, but when I can tell a real story, that's super powerful. So again, simple things, they don't have to be super difficult or take a lot of time or resources. So again, this is really what we talked about before. Define your program goals. What is it? This is kind of a broad, your mission statement. What is it you're trying to accomplish in the grand scheme of things? Where are you going? From there, well, you have to have some kind of bite-sized pieces, right, to get to that big goal. Those are objectives. So right now we're working on XYZ. This is going to help us get to that big overarching goal that we want to accomplish. I like to tell people goals are not something you ever hope to achieve, right? It's always, you should be something you're always working towards. And if you get there, that's wonderful. But, let's say you're trying to end domestic violence here in Colorado Springs. That's going to take some time. That will take a bit. So don't think I'm going to put this goal out there and, we're going to get there in 2 years. But you think of a goal as, it's a journey. It's not a destination. So define the objectives, but the objectives are destinations. Those are those pieces. They're little baby steps that you take towards the goal. And you want to make sure that they're we can talk about SMART objectives, but I don't want to bore you with SMART objectives. Just make sure that they're meaningful, that it's something that you can accomplish and it's something you can demonstrate. And then you want to measure. What are the outcomes? What are we hoping to see in 6 months, in a year, in 2 years, 5, so on and so forth? Kind of jot those down. Because again, everyone has a guide. They have a star that they're working towards. These are the things that you need to accomplish to be able to get to that big goal. You want to compare those outcomes to your objectives. And that may sound simple, but one of the things that's really neat with evaluation work or assessment is that oftentimes you have these unintended benefits that happen when you're doing whatever intervention or program or community service you may have. And it can be really interesting when you sit down to look at the data or look at whatever results that you have, whether it's qualitative or quantitative. You may see something, wow, we're doing something we didn't even plan to do, but it's super awesome. And now we want to include that as one of our actual objectives. Sometimes you see that there are some deficiencies, some growth areas, and that's fine. I mean, nothing's perfect. You always want to have something to work on and build towards. And so you could be revising your goals and objectives from the data. So you see this as a loop, right? There is no beginning, there is no end. You can jump in at any point in the process. You can go back to your organization on Monday, sit down with staff and go, where are our outcomes? Let's talk about those. You don't have to start at point A. You just jump into the loop and keep going. So what does it look like? In a formal sense, it looks like this, but it doesn't have to look like this for your nonprofit. In general, you'd like to see some kind of baseline measure. That's called a pretest. So you have something. You know where we're starting right here. This is where we start. And then everything else is building on it. So training questionnaires, programmatic questionnaires, service questionnaires, anything you can do to kind of standardize the information that you get either from staff or your partners or the people that you're serving so that you have really a standardized record. Because if you ask someone, what do you think about the services I got? I don't know what kind of answer you might get because people will interpret that differently. But if you slide them a form and say, I just need you to, just real quick, it's 5 questions, circle of whatever, a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Make it simple, then you have standard information that you can look at over time. It's not where you're trying to weed through qualitative information. Qualitative stuff is really, really powerful and great. It's time consuming. So you do want to have those numbers to kind of supplement there. Module test, if you have something where you have, there are little incremental steps to providing services, you can assess those. That's all I mean by module assessments or module tests. Post questionnaire. So if you're providing a service, you know that this is your baseline, and you provide an intervention, a service, support, whatever it may be in your community. You want to know, well, what impact did that have? You started at this level, we were hoping to get you at least here. So did we get here or not? That's what you can learn. So you can compare the pre-test information to the post-test and see where your impact was. It's super powerful. And again, it doesn't need to be complicated. It can be 2, 3, 5 questions. It doesn't need to be long. An impact survey, this is usually done after a service is provided, an event is held, training is done, education programs are administered, whatever it may be. This is the long-term impact of what you provided. So you would do this 4 months afterwards, 3 months afterwards. It could be as simple as sending someone an email saying, hey, can you go to SurveyMonkey and just fill out these 2 questions. It's really important for us as an organization to be able to provide good services, make sure that we're providing quality and substance to the people that we serve. There are some, technology. It goes faster than we do. So thankfully, there are some really great resources that you can use. Surveys that you post online. It kind of replaces some of the more traditional paper surveys, or even having to sit down with someone and do intake stuff, or where you're sort of processing them out. This can be done. It's simple. Usually, in many ways, it's free. I think if you get to a certain level like SurveyMonkey, it can cost. But in general, it can be it's cheap. It doesn't cost a ton. So again, use these resources. It cuts down on the staff time that you need to do it, and it's really beneficial. So just echoing again, it's about the front portion of it.
And I agree with some of the speakers that we've had today that have talked about we have surveyed people to death. And in some sense, a survey may not be the best instrument. And in some places, in some things that you guys are doing, a survey actually would be detrimental because it feels horrible to the person who's actually giving the service. So staff has the ability to provide observations, check boxes, checklists that we keep underneath our table that allows us to sort of talk about, well, what's happening with this person. We also have the ability to look at some of the data that is that I take for granted often in my own office that comes through in terms of artifacts that people leave behind. So for students, it's their former papers and those types of things that they leave behind that we can use for our assessment process because it shows growth. You might have something that you have in terms of the services that you're providing that are left behind by people, reflections. If you're having people do workshops or cooking classes or those types of things, what happened there are some things that we can take and say those are left behind. We can use those for our assessment process. The other thing I just want to point out here is that we got to know that we're ready to be evaluated. So depending upon how old the program is, you're going to have some different approaches to evaluation. An organization that's been around for 10, 15 years has a stack of data that I can go through now and probably just go through someone's desk drawer and find a whole lot of stuff and be like, oh, I can tell you exactly what's going on. But if you just started your nonprofit 6 months ago, you don't have the desk drawer. And so your evaluation is going to be a lot simpler. And also, the data you're trying to collect are going to be different. You're going to be talking about, well, we don't know what's going to happen 3 years from now, but we can tell you what's going to happen the next quarter. So the time frame gets adjusted, what we're collecting gets adjusted, and also how much we're collecting gets adjusted. So simplicity. So this is a tool that I actually use a lot in terms of trying to figure out, are we ready for evaluation? And the questions that you're moving through are basically questions of who's doing what, can we expect to do this, where is the stuff located, and will it address the actual questions that we really want? Or do we need to go ahead and figure out another set of data that we aren't already doing to be able to address that particular question? And so, again, that's in the PowerPoint that you guys have on your little app. But take it, use it, adjust it, so that it makes sense to you guys as you're talking about evaluation to your staff members or your board members. Essentially, we just want to be able to figure out a map of what we're collecting and if what we're collecting actually connects up to the big questions we want to address. But maybe it's mine. So it could be either one of us. Basically, here's the thing. When we're getting evaluation feedback, we want to look at it from different levels. And so we're trying to figure out if we can actually have that evaluation speak to the individual, to our organization, and also to an external organization. Because a lot of the things that we talk about are for federal agencies, et cetera, for state agencies. Can it be exported to them in an easy way?
So there are obstacles within any nonprofit, any organization, at the federal. There are always obstacles to evaluation and research. But again, if you kind of front load, you make this part of your culture, your organization, where everyone's on the same research team, it helps mitigate a lot of these challenges. So one of the things that I see commonly when I work with organizations is this communication piece that we talked about earlier, where you have, it seems that research and research goals tend to live at the executive level and they don't necessarily get translated to everyone. So people may be doing evaluation work and they don't realize it. Like Regina said, they kind of keep those little slips. I mean, they actually have what you need to answer your questions, but they don't know that the question exists. So making sure that those things are communicated, that everyone feels like, we're one big happy research family here. The lack of financial support for evaluation research, I wouldn't worry about this one at all. People think evaluation is really expensive. And if you go out and hire an external evaluator and I need it all. I need the evaluability assessment, I need the process evaluation, I need the outcome assessment. That is expensive. But there are many things that you can do to mitigate the cost. Making it part of your sort of daily, weekly activities is one way. Getting everyone on the team, I mean, it's great when you can bring an army to an issue, right? So just really kind of use what you have at your disposal already to make evaluation work. Also reach out to people, because we have a university here and professors need to publish a lot. Reach out, say, hey, I've got this program, we're providing this service in the community, can you help us out? I do a lot of this kind of work pro bono. Either I do it just because it's a passion project, or I do it because, hey, it's a great project, I think we should be researching this, let's get something published so you can tell the whole world about the amazing things that are happening right here in Colorado Springs. This is the most common. It's an afterthought. It's an extra. It's something that maybe you have to do, maybe you don't have to do, but typically this gets thought of 2 weeks before the final report is due. And I had a student ask me recently whether I'd ever seen an organization who absolutely could not answer their questions, whatever their questions may be. Were we successful? Did we serve this many folks? Did we make this kind of impact on our community? I've never actually seen anyone who couldn't answer the question. I have seen many people who couldn't answer it very well, because there was no thought at the beginning. They weren't front loading, they weren't bringing their staff, they weren't bringing researchers to the table initially to kind of plan out, how do we do this? How do we do it on a shoestring budget? If you've got all the resources in the world, who do we hire to do it for us so we don't have to worry about it? So just don't, if you do nothing else after you leave here today, sit down and think about evaluation and where you want to go with it. What are your questions? What do you want to answer? And how do you maximize or tap into the resources that you have right at your disposal to do it? If that's all you do, it's a win. Availability and access to data. This is another big one. Again, it's wonderful if you collect information, but if you don't use it, or if it's not in a format that's accessible, then that can be a real challenge. And the quality of the data, missing data, I'm an evaluator, I can't fix missing data. If it's not there, I can't create it. And sometimes that is a real impairment to being able to answer your questions, or to being able to demonstrate to a grantor or a community partner, or whoever it may be, that, hey, we did all these things and we had a huge impact, it had a ripple effect in the community. So you want to make sure that you have what's necessary, again, because it can be pretty simple. It can be done for free, it can be done cheaply. So just make sure that you have it and that the data, it actually will help you answer the questions. When you think about this as an afterthought, that's where you really run into these challenges with the quality. Measurement issues. How is your outcome defined? This can be a challenge, and this really happens usually between whoever's working with a funder or a grantor, where they don't, you get those big words and you're like, oh, okay. But you should negotiate it. You should really make sure that you understand what it is they're looking for from you and what are they trying to accomplish with the information. Methodological, technological issues. People run into this. Program evaluation is not super complicated. It can be, you can read a couple of pamphlets and honestly be where you need to be collecting information and using it wisely. So I wouldn't let those things, any of these things stop you. You just need to kind of work through them and make sure you have a plan in place to overcome those. So again, ways to deal with these challenges. If you think of evaluation or assessment as a way to make you better, your nonprofit better, then research isn't a scary thing, it's not a challenging thing, it's just another tool that you're using on a daily basis to make sure that your organization is really, really strong. Build evaluation into the budget, even if it's $100, $500, whatever it may be, just count on it. If you're applying for funding, we talk about this quite a bit in grant writing, because funders need to see some results, some data, some performance measures, whatever it may be. That costs money. It's somebody's time. Even if it's a staff person's time for 10 minutes a day, it's still time. So make sure that you budget that in and that you ask the funder to pay for it. It's not something that they get necessarily for free. Involve staff from the beginning. Select and involve an evaluator. This isn't someone you have to pay. It could be a partner. It could be School of Public Affairs. We love to partner. We have students who love to partner. Try to measure what is important in ways that are feasible. So if I have someone who comes to me and they're, oh, we need to do something, we have to demonstrate some positive outcomes here, first thing I say, testimonials. Get some. Send out some emails, put some forms on your front desk. Can you fill this out for us? Drop it in the fishbowl. Super simple. It doesn't cost anything. It's the printing cost. That would be it. So whatever is feasible for you.
So what happens if a disaster happens? We've done everything we possibly can in order to create a wonderful evaluation, and you're 6 weeks away from the evaluation being due, and what that looks like for you, and the data's not there. Something happened. Something happened. No one put anything in the fishbowl. There's in the fishbowl sort of things. We're at the end of this. What can we do? Well, Stephanie has the one that I go to a lot. We call up the experts that we have available to us, our partners. Can you provide us with a testimonial about what's happening? Can you provide us with information about what our clients are doing with their life, etc.? We start going through the newspapers in order to figure out, do we have any of the information that can sort of outside of ourselves confirm this is happening? Because this is what happens when you have like the disaster, which hopefully never happens to anyone in this room. But these are the things that we sort of think about to be able to rebuttress up what happens when we do data. The other thing that we can do is we can actually bring in people as focus groups. They can be called a lot of different things. Focus groups, citizens during appraisal, appreciative inquiry, all the cool terms. But essentially we're getting a group of folks together and asking them, tell us your story, and gathering that information and the synergy that comes from them. And in that synergy, also asking the hard question, what could we have done better? Those 5 earlier questions at the very beginning, that second slide, those are the questions that are going to become my focus group questions for that session. The other things that we can look at is we can figure out, are there other organizations who we have shared clients with, or we have addressed this issue together? Do they have existing data that we can also piggyback on? Right? And so that becomes the disaster to stave off the disaster of missing qualitative data. If we look at the next slide, we have what to do when we have the disaster of trying to figure out if the quantitative, the number stuff doesn't work out, right? And again, we go back through and see who else has been studying us. I love the Pikes Peak region. We are data conscious. Usually someone else has some data that is similar to what we need, right? And so we can use those comparatives in order to look at it. It's not a one-to-one. We'll be able to say that we have the new Nobel Peace Prize? No. It's not going to be for that. Will Stephanie be able to publish it? No. But for right now, because the disaster happened, we're going to be able to at least have some information that has a comparative for us. And then we have a plan to do better later. And for most funders, if that's what happens, they'll say, okay, we understand, you've done everything you possibly can in order to create some sort of comparative, but you have a plan of action to fix the problem before. To prevent having to use these fail-safes, again, we go back to that throat moaning, and we go back to trying to make it a culture of assessment as much as possible. If I know that we're going to be having a data problem, if I know that those fish bowls don't work, or for some reason our clients aren't filling out their reflection papers at the end, their intake forms, if that's not working, if I'm paying attention to the data, if we're having this conversation at our staff meeting, if we're having this updates for us at the board member meetings, we're going to see there's a hole, and then we can fix that then. If we wait till the end, when things are due, we can't fix it, and we're left with these sort of one-offs. They can help, but they're not perfect.
So what I try to work towards with every partner that I'm either engaged with in the community or outside of Colorado, and this is really, really important, it's not just that you want the information to serve a purpose in-house where you're using that information to improve services, maximize, make you more efficient, more effective. When you have that, you want to let the whole world know about your good news. So there are many ways to do this where it's not a burden on an organization. You can partner up with people. You can post something wonderful to a website. We reached 1,000 people served in the community today. Send out a mass text, email communications, And it could elevate all the way to some type of report, a final report, a midterm report, whatever it may be, up to publications, where these things have a way of growing. When you put the information out there, I also call this my Good News Gazette. Everyone should have a Good News Gazette. It's going to look different for every organization, but when you're planning your evaluation strategy and you're implementing this into your organization, think about, okay, we're doing this. There's an upfront benefit to us because it helps us be better, stronger, more organized, more efficient. But beyond that, how can we really get a return on our investment? And that is to put it out there. Let people know that you're there. Let people know that you're doing good things and that you're having a real impact on your community. So communicate and share your findings.
So the report style that I like to use is this one, the most significant report, the most significant finding or change. And again, it comes back to program evaluation. I think a lot of us have made it because we love it. We will report out and create reports that we know no one's going to read, but it felt good when we wrote it down, right? So you can have that report, and it's fine. And I've written that report. I'm in the middle of writing 2 of them right now, and I know no one's going to read it. But my students also know that there's this other report that we require, and that is this one that people will actually read. And it boils it down to, what's the story here? What did you actually change? And it's a snapshot. It's tight, it's clean, it's meant to be something that someone else besides you would say, yeah, got it, right? And then you can go to the rest of the resources later to read the stuff that no one's going to do, right? That no one's going to read. And as a person who has to deal with this a lot, I have started writing for the people who don't read. Not because they don't want to, but because they have no time to. And so don't bury your findings. I can't say this enough. Don't bury your findings. Put them up front. It is the first thing that's on there. We changed lives here. If you go to our website, that's the first thing they'll say. We changed lives. And now we'll tell you how. And then we'll tell you all the good stuff in the background of what we actually did to do that. But we will tell you what the big Good News Gazette is up front. The headline is there, not buried between. And to get there, we did a contrast and comparison group, yada, yada. They want to know what the outcome is. And so don't bury that. That's for tips in terms of the communication. If we're looking at the next slide, know your audience. Now, for some of you guys who have had a research methods class, your heart just went, that's okay, don't worry. I bring this up only because of this. These are the technical jargon terms. But there's something we really want to get out of this, and it's 3 things. The first thing is we just want to know what happened. What was the number? What was the vignette, the story that gets to it? What happened? And that's that first description portion of this. The second thing that we want to know is how big of an impact we can have. Is this one person's story? Is this 17 people's stories? Is this 45 people's stories? That's that strength, that's that maximization. That's what we want to know. If you know that these 2 things are connected, you know that your program works really, really well. What's the extent that we can say it works in all these other different situations? And that can be through numbers, or that can be through wonderful, wonderfully rich case studies, stories, vignettes of our clientele. And the last thing we want to know is it localized just to you? Or is it something that can go to a broader audience? If I'm looking at it from the outside in as a funder, can I just pick you guys up and replicate you around the world? And if I can't, why can't I? And you just tell us. Because what's making us work really well together is that we have these unique people here with these unique credentials. Or it's because our unique Pikes Peak region loves evaluation. And that's why a workshop like this can work here. Whatever it is, you get a chance to tell that part of the story. And if you can tell us those 3 things, regardless of what the actual math, et cetera, is, or the types of techniques that are used, those are the 3 things we want to know. What happened? What's the strength, the maximum amount of change we can have, that variability around that? And then lastly, is it just located to us, or is it transferable to everybody else? We've talked a lot about inside of the Pikes Peak region about impact and outcomes, and you can see a lot of the jargon that is here. We have short-term effects. What's the short-term effects? Is it 6 weeks or 6 months? I don't know, but you figured out which one you want to, which camp you want to be in. But the point is with all of these things is that we want to be able to sort of parsimony out stories that allow us to speak to each one of these things. For short term, what does it look like when they leave our doors? A couple of weeks later, longer term, what does it look like? What does it look like for their families? That's those outcomes that are part of the community. What does it look like for us as a community? That might be those cost savings, those negative impacts that we are able to mitigate. Or maybe because we have provided them so much excitement that they're able to be employed, or so much confidence that they're able to change the family dynamics, that they're going to be able to win, not only for that family, but win in another way that impacts their neighborhood or their community. How do we capture that? And then that brings us to the next one, where we start to talk about, again, the heart went, but don't worry, it's just jargon. All they're trying to do is figure out if we can figure out how to tell someone, how do you know that? So how do you attribute the goodness of your impact to you guys? How do you know that it's you and not you plus somebody else? And if it's you plus somebody else, that's okay, good credit, that's great. We want to know. But is there some way that we can do that? And that's what you're trying to communicate. If you guys are able to provide goodness and positivity, what does that look like? As a substitution sort of idea, if you weren't here, what would we be missing? So that thing I was bragging about earlier with my students and those $435,000 of money that they contribute through their service and back labor to organizations, how much would they have to pay consultants to have to do those services? We have a number, I'm not going to say it, but we have a number for that. And it's amazing for us to be able to sort of think about it in that sort of term. But for them doing this work, what does that mean? And then to be able to communicate that to our students and say, look, it's not just that you're getting a degree. You are getting a degree and impacting the community. And if you don't do this at a really high level, look how much damage you are going to leave, right? No pressure. But I mean, that's the type of impact that this type of analysis can do. And though it has a fancy jargon terms associated with it, social return on investment, all we're doing is trying to figure out, if not for you here, then what else? And it can be very complex, and there are ways to make that calculus really exciting, but it can be very, very simple. And for us, it took us looking at what exactly are how many students we have, how many hours they contribute to these different types of projects, figuring out what the volunteer hours are going to look like from the Independent Center, which is a free resource again for those calculations. Well, not the local one, the national one, but I love you guys too. They have different services. But looking at those numbers, putting that stuff together, doing the multiplication, which I didn't do, someone else did. Use my methods, not my math. They're better. And then looking at what the consultants would have been, what that price tag looks like on the other side, if we had them actually buy and figure out the differences. Simple, easy. But we can make it much more complicated. I can do discounting rates. I can try and put it into real dollars for the effect. I can do all sorts of cool fancy stuff, which would be fun for me to do. But for you guys, that's all that it is. It's just trying to figure out a way that makes sense to talk about what your outcomes may look like.
So some tips for providing recommendations, suggestions, and options for improvement. Always be humble, not global. Kind of focus on what you have right in front of you, your staff, your clients, your community, your partners. Make sure you don't make it too big. Again, it needs to be manageable and feasible for wherever you are. Be thoughtful. everything occurs in a context. I think the first time I heard this, I was like, that's brilliant. and I was actually a little too old to admit that, but I was like, well, that makes perfect sense. So again, have that, any kind of comparison. I mean, you can pull stats off of, you can Google stuff, right? Find something. This is a comparison, this is what we're doing. So we know we're on the right track, or we're exceeding expectations, whatever it may be. And make sure that your recommendations are feasible. Make sure that they're reasonable, that they're attainable, because everyone wants to make sure that they're achieving something, that they're hitting the milestone, that they're making progress. So don't aim for the moon. Make it accessible and reasonable. Also, you want to make sure that you're noting differences amongst your recommendations, your suggestions, and your options for that. Make sure that your recommendations flow from findings. I mean, right now, evidence-based practice and evidence-based research and evidence-based service, it is mainstream. It took it a while to get here. This is, that's the buzzword, evidence-based, evidence-based. All that means is that it's based on some information. It's based on knowledge. It's based on experience. It doesn't have to be based on a gazillion megabyte, data set that you have. It could be something as simple as you looking through, what's in the fishbowl. When we talk about evaluation, it's right in front of you. And we were asked to make sure that everyone filled out the little blue sheet. That's really all it is. It doesn't have to be super fancy or complicated, but you do want, if you're actually coming up with growth areas, if you're working towards something, a little mini goal, make sure that it makes sense, that it's flowing from what you know, and not a hypothetical. Connect your program cause with direct action to alleviate the problem. So when you come up with these growth areas, we need to serve more people, we need to strengthen staff, we need to create more partners. Make sure that there is something very specific there, that it's measurable, that it's attainable, and invite others to be a part of the conversation. I mean, one of the things I love about Colorado Springs is that we are a big town, so there's a big community here, and invite a partner to just have a workshop, half a day, or 1 day, where you talk about research. What are you guys doing? I mean, how do we maybe partner? And how do we do this where it's feasible and it's affordable? So invite others to be part of that conversation.
So because we're college professors, I know that's where we live. I'll talk to some anything tonight. But at the end, I have a little bit of questions.
I'm intrigued because you mentioned this simple instrument we have of us. So this is the only input we provide for nonprofit day for the assessment. So it sounds like you consider this to be evaluation. How do you take something like that, those kinds of responses, and determine how impact whether you achieve the outcome?
Well, I mean, what I do with that kind of information, and I was literally doing a qualitative analysis last night, is I look for patterns or trends in the feedback that I'm getting. So if I see 15 responses that are, the facility wasn't quite right, the presenters didn't seem prepared, then I know, okay, well, so next year we need to make sure that we address those things. Again, you're using the information in front of you, and I actually really do like, it's a bit of a coincidence that we have these in front of you, but I think it just demonstrates that evaluation doesn't have to be quantitative. It doesn't have to be numbers. You don't have to have an auditor come in. You don't need a big fancy consultant. It could be really something as simple as filling out a little sheet of paper. But that's what I'm looking for in terms of the qualitative feedback.
Then do you have some way you summarize these, or you just have key observations that you just get from staring at them?
So there are software packages that help you actually analyze it, or you can just be looking at it and go, okay, that's the 10th one I've seen where they really, really loved this presentation and they felt like they could take it back and implement it in their space. So, I mean, it could just be something where you're looking for the trend, the pattern there. So it could get complicated, it could be simple.
And there could be validation back to you as a presenter, how well that went. To a funder, say a sponsor of nonprofit day, how would you present this information to them to show that you have that outcome?
So this one is super simple. When I have either those forms or I have a spreadsheet, it's got that kind of information in there, it goes into one of two slots, positive, negative. And so what I would say is we got 1,000 of these little blue forms back, 99% of them were positive. So it doesn't have to be, you don't have to have any stat skills to do that. You can simply sort. This one's in the middle. This one, they had some concerns. This one, they loved it. So, I mean, that's a simple thing where you can go back and say, thank you so much for sponsoring this event. We're pleased to let you know that almost every single participant that we had really, really got something valuable and applicable.
And then after you've done the positive and negative buckets, then you can break it down into smaller buckets. In terms of, maybe it's about the presenters, maybe it's about the workshops. We break it down, again, into those points of positive and negative. Here's what we know about this. And then we take one step further and we say, let's look back at our process that we have for our program and what we started doing this and putting these things together. So if it was about the workshops, when we start to figure out, well, how do we do our workshops, how do we gather them in there, here's the data that we have, and then we have a conversation about what that looks like. So we want to present that we are also, here's the data of positive and negative, but also tie it back to, here's the process we've identified that it's connected to. And then we have that last bit, and here's how we are going to plan to improve or to keep this and strengthen it. That is a powerful sandwich of a piece of data for another